My name is Claire Bennett, and the moment I realized my father valued my sister more than me was the day he walked into the first house I had ever owned. I bought that house alone. No family money. No co-signer. No rescue plan waiting behind me if things failed. I worked 12 years to afford it. Late nights. Weekend contracts. Small apartments with broken heaters. Every sacrifice finally led to that front door. But when my father arrived, he did not look proud. Richard Bennett walked through my living room slowly, studying the walls and furniture like he was inspecting a property before a sale. Behind him stood my younger sister Emily, quiet and perfectly calm, almost like she already knew how the conversation would end. I offered coffee. Neither of them answered. My father stopped near the kitchen island and crossed his arms. "This place is bigger than you need," he said flatly. I laughed a little because I honestly thought he was joking. Then he looked directly at me. "Emily needs stability right now. You should transfer the house to her." The room went completely still. At first I waited for him to smile, for someone to admit this was ridiculous. But Emily avoided my eyes immediately, and that was when I understood this conversation had already happened before they arrived. I asked him if he seriously expected me to give away the home I spent half my life building. His expression never changed. "You're financially secure," he replied. "Your sister isn't. Sometimes family has to make sacrifices." Family. That word sounded different coming from him because in our family, sacrifice had always meant me. When I refused, his tone hardened instantly. "You know I can remove you from the will without thinking twice." Emily finally looked up then, almost relieved he had said it out loud. I did not argue. I reached into my bag calmly and placed a sealed folder on the kitchen counter between us. My father frowned and opened it slowly. The second he saw the first page, the color drained from his face. People think favoritism inside a family is obvious. They imagine dramatic moments, cruel words, or parents openly admitting they love one child more. Real favoritism is usually quieter than that. It looks like excuses. It sounds like patience for one child and criticism for the other. And in my family, it lasted so long that eventually everyone treated it like normal. Emily was 6 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids, my father treated her like someone the world needed to protect. If she forgot homework, the teacher was unfair. If she lost a job, the manager was jealous. If she overspent money, life was simply stressful for her. Meanwhile, every mistake I made became proof that I should work harder. When I was 17, I worked weekends at a grocery store to help pay for community college classes. Emily was 13 then, already getting expensive birthday gifts and shopping trips whenever she felt upset. I still remember one Christmas when my father handed me an envelope with $200 and told me to use it wisely because money was tight. 10 minutes later, Emily opened a brand new laptop while my father smiled proudly beside her. Nobody explained the difference. They just expected me to understand it. And eventually I did. By my mid-20s, I stopped asking for fairness entirely. I built my life separately from them because it was easier than constantly feeling disappointed. I paid my own tuition, bought my own car, fixed my own problems. Emily did the opposite. She moved between apartments constantly, borrowed money she never repaid, and somehow always found someone else responsible for the damage left behind. My father covered credit card debt more than once. He even co-signed a lease after she broke the previous one. Every family gathering followed the same pattern. Emily arrived with chaos. I arrived with stability. Somehow she received sympathy while I received expectations. That house meant more to me than property. It was the first thing in my life nobody could take credit for helping me build. Every wall inside it represented years of proving I could survive without anyone saving me. So when my father stood in my kitchen asking me to hand it over like it belonged to the family instead of me, something inside me finally stopped trying to earn his approval. Because deep down I think I already knew something he didn't. Emily's problems were no longer small enough for him to fix. My father sat down slowly after opening the folder, but he still looked irritated more than concerned. At least at first. He flipped through the first few pages quickly, barely paying attention. Bank statements. Transaction records. Account summaries. To him, it probably looked like paperwork designed to make a point. Then he reached the highlighted withdrawals. That was when his expression changed. His eyes slowed down. His jaw tightened slightly. He turned back 2 pages and read the same section again more carefully. Emily shifted beside him immediately. "There's probably some mistake," she said too quickly. "Banks mess things up all the time." I stayed calm. "No, irraplia. They usually don't." My father looked up at me sharply. "What exactly is this?" I leaned against the counter and folded my arms. "Those are withdrawals made from your secondary retirement account over the last 18 months. Emily crossed her arms instantly. "I never touched his money." I nodded toward the paperwork. The bank investigator traced the logins already. The transactions came from devices registered under your name. The room became very quiet after that. Not dramatic quiet. Heavy quiet. The kind where everyone suddenly realizes the conversation is no longer going where they expected. My father turned another page. Then another. Each document made him visibly more uncomfortable. There were wire transfers he did not recognize. Account updates he claimed he never approved. Notification changes connected to email addresses that were not his. Emily stopped pretending to be relaxed. She started pacing slowly near the dining table, rubbing her hands together while avoiding eye contact completely. Then my father reached the trust amendment paperwork. "This isn't possible," he muttered. I watched him reread the document 3 separate times before speaking again. Months earlier, while reviewing tax paperwork for my own mortgage approval, I noticed something strange connected to one of my father's financial records. At first I assumed it was administrative confusion, but the deeper I looked, the worse it became. Someone had quietly filed ownership modifications connected to family assets, including my father's property accounts, including the house he was standing inside. "What is this trust?" he asked. "You tell me," I answered calmly. "Because according to those records, someone already tried restructuring ownership under a legal amendment you supposedly approved." Emily stopped pacing entirely. My father stared at the signature line in silence. Then his face changed again. Because the attorney listed on the filing was Martin Keller, a lawyer disbarred 3 years earlier for financial misconduct. And for the first time since entering my house, my father no longer looked angry. He looked afraid. My father kept staring at the paperwork like the answer might suddenly rearrange itself into something less dangerous. But every page only made things worse. Richard Bennett knew exactly who Martin Keller was. Years ago, Martin handled several family legal matters before losing his license after an investigation into fraudulent filings. My father cut ties with him immediately after the scandal and swore he never wanted his name connected to the family again. Yet there it was. Martin Keller's signature sat across multiple trust amendments tied directly to my father's accounts. "This makes no sense," my father whispered. "Martin had no access to anything anymore." Emily spoke before I could answer. "He told me everything was legal." My father looked at her sharply. "You talked to Martin?" She froze. For the first time that night, Emily looked less confident than cornered. "I only signed what he told me to sign," she said quietly. The room went silent again. I reached into the folder and slid another document across the table. Security timestamps, building access logs, camera verification records from the private banking office downtown. My father recognized the address immediately. "You went there?" he asked Emily. She swallowed hard but said nothing. I pointed toward the highlighted section near the bottom. She verified identity changes in person 3 separate times. My father rubbed both hands across his face slowly, exhaustion beginning to replace anger. I could see the exact moment he stopped viewing Emily as someone manipulated by bad advice. Because this required planning. Repeated planning. Then he reached the witness section on the final page. His eyes stopped moving entirely. "No," he said immediately. "That can't be right." But it was. The witness who notarized the documents was Thomas Bennett, my father's older brother. The same brother he had not spoken to in almost 9 years after a bitter inheritance dispute tore the family apart. Emily looked terrified now. "I didn't know they weren't speaking," she whispered weakly. But my father barely heard her. He leaned back in the chair slowly like all the strength had left his body at once. Thomas knew family records better than anyone. He understood old property structures, trust accounts, signatures, everything. If Thomas was involved, this was not random paperwork confusion anymore. This was coordinated, careful, intentional. I let the silence settle before speaking again. You still think this was about my house? My father looked up at me slowly. And that was the moment he realized the house was never the real target. My father looked smaller somehow after that. Not physically, emotionally. Like every document inside that folder had removed another layer of certainty from him. Emily stayed near the dining table without speaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself now. The confidence she walked into my house with was disappearing fast. I sat down across from my father and pushed the remaining papers toward him. The house transfer was never the main goal, I said quietly. It was the cleanup. He frowned slowly. I explained everything carefully because at that point there was no reason to hold anything back anymore. About 8 months earlier, I started noticing inconsistencies connected to my father's financial mail. Incorrect forwarding addresses, duplicate tax notifications, account alerts tied to institutions he never mentioned using. First I ignored it. Families with complicated finances create confusion sometimes. But then one afternoon, while helping finalize documents for my mortgage refinancing, I saw an ownership reference connected to a trust structure that should not have existed. That was when I contacted Daniel Brooks. Daniel worked fraud investigations for a private financial security firm, and after reviewing the first records, he told me something I will never forget. People usually don't start with the biggest theft, he said. They test smaller boundaries first. And Emily had been testing boundaries for years. The hidden accounts were opened gradually under my father's identity, using layered access permissions. Small transfers moved first, then larger ones. Every time nobody questioned it, the amounts increased. Credit lines, retirement withdrawals, trust reallocations. By the time I discovered the pattern, tens of thousands of dollars had already moved through secondary accounts tied indirectly to my father's name. My father closed his eyes when I explained how long it had been happening. She said she was struggling, he muttered quietly. I nodded once. I know. That was the tragedy of it. Emily never learned consequences because someone always rescued her before they arrived. Late rent became family support. Debt became temporary hardship. Dishonesty became emotional stress everyone else was expected to forgive. And eventually she stopped believing limits applied to her at all. When people are protected from consequences long enough, I said carefully, they stop believing consequences exist. My father looked toward Emily then, but not with anger anymore. With regret. Real regret. Emily finally spoke again, her voice shaking harder now. I was going to fix it. But nobody answered her. Because by then all three of us understood the same thing. There are some situations that cannot be fixed quietly once the truth finally reaches daylight. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute after Emily said she was going to fix it. The silence inside my kitchen felt heavier than any argument could have. My father sat motionless at the table staring at the paperwork, while Emily kept glancing toward the front door like she was calculating how quickly she could leave without making things worse. But things were already worse. I reached for my phone calmly and opened my recent calls. Emily noticed immediately. What are you doing? She asked. I did not answer her. I pressed the speaker button and waited. Daniel Brooks picked up after the second ring. Claire, he said professionally. We completed the verification process. My father slowly lifted his head. Daniel continued speaking while I kept the phone between us on the counter. The account activity has now triggered formal fraud review protocols across all linked institutions. Temporary freezes were approved 30 minutes ago. Emily's face lost color instantly. My father grabbed his phone at nearly the same moment a notification appeared on his screen. Then another. And another. Restricted access alerts. Security review notices. Temporary hold confirmations. The reality of everything finally became impossible to deny. Emily took a step backward. This is insane, she whispered. Claire, please. But I stayed calm because panic changes nothing once systems start moving officially. Daniel continued. We also received confirmation from Thomas Bennett this morning. He agreed to provide a full statement regarding the witness signatures. That was the moment Emily turned toward the front door completely. Not dramatic. Not fast. Just instinct. Like her body finally understood something her mind had been avoiding all night. My father noticed too. "Emily," he said quietly. She stopped walking but did not turn around. I placed one last document onto the counter beside the phone. It showed the attempted transfer request connected to my house. Forged approval chains. Unauthorized trust adjustments. Digital authorization records. The final step she planned before investigators closed in. "The transfer was already blocked," I said softly. "The property is under protective review now. Any further attempt automatically escalates into criminal investigation." Emily covered her mouth with one hand. My father leaned back in his chair slowly, looking older than I had ever seen him. And suddenly nobody cared about inheritance anymore. Nobody cared about family image. Because the house no longer felt like a home. Felt like evidence. I barely slept that night. Not because I felt guilty. Because everything familiar suddenly felt broken beyond repair. The sun came up slowly through the kitchen windows while my father remained in the same chair where he had been sitting for hours. At some point during the night, Emily moved into the guest room without saying a word. Nobody argued anymore. That part was over. The next morning the house felt cold in a way I could not explain. Not physically cold. Emotionally empty. Like the walls themselves understood something permanent had happened there. Around 9:30, two officials arrived from the Financial Investigations Unit. Calm voices. Professional clothes. No drama. That somehow made everything feel even more serious. They asked simple questions. Dates. Account access. Verification history. My father answered quietly without defending Emily once. Every response sounded slower than the last, like he was forcing himself to finally acknowledge reality instead of avoiding it. Emily sat at the far end of the living room during the interviews, staring at the floor with hollow eyes. The confidence she carried her entire life was gone now. No excuses. No emotional speeches. Just silence. And honestly, that silence hurt more than anger would have. Because for the first time, she understood nobody could protect her from consequences anymore. After the officials left, my father finally looked at me directly. I expected him to apologize. He didn't. Instead, he asked one simple question. "Why didn't you come to me first?" I stared at him for several seconds before answering because the truth was painful in a way I knew he was finally ready to hear. "I did," I said quietly. "For years." His expression changed immediately. Not defensive. Not angry. Just tired. I explained that every ignored warning, every excuse made for Emily, every moment where accountability disappeared had slowly led us there. The fraud did not begin with money. It began with permission. My father lowered his eyes after that and said nothing else. I walked upstairs, packed a small overnight bag, and paused one final time near the front door. That house still belonged to me. But somehow it no longer felt connected to the family standing inside. And maybe that was the real loss none of us saw coming. I used to believe family loyalty meant protecting people no matter what they did. Now I think real loyalty means telling the truth before damage becomes permanent. What happened with my father and sister was never really about money. The accounts, the forged paperwork, even the house itself were only symptoms of something much deeper that had been growing quietly for years. Unchecked behavior. Excuses disguised as love. And the dangerous belief that some people should never face consequences because they are family. The hardest part was realizing my father never intended to destroy our family. He thought he was helping Emily survive. But every time he removed accountability from her life, he unknowingly taught her that limits could always be negotiated away. Eventually she believed it completely. A lot of people watching this probably understand that feeling better than they want to admit. Maybe you were the responsible sibling. Maybe you spent years carrying expectations while someone else kept receiving second chances. That kind of imbalance changes families slowly. Then suddenly, I do not hate my father. And honestly, I do not even hate Emily anymore. Some people spend so much time avoiding consequences that they never learn how to live honestly once consequences finally arrive. Before I left that morning, I looked back at the house one last time and realized something important. Peace does not always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from finally refusing to carry responsibilities that never belonged to you in the first place. If you have ever dealt with favoritism, manipulation, or betrayal inside your own family, share your story in the comments. And remember this: love without accountability is not protection. Sometimes it becomes permission.